the fact that our subconscious mind, remember we talked about it being like file folders, and then the output is a result of those file folders. And what we need to understand is that actually creates, over time, a model of thinking. So then everything that comes in gets filtered through a model of thinking. So I love to share this story. It's actually in my book, but it's from Gilda Radner and her book that by the name of It's Always Something. So Gilda Radner speaks about, she had this cousin who had a dog. It was a mutt, and it was pregnant. And the dog was out in the yard and got in the way of the lawnmower. And its 2 back legs got cut off. I know, it's sad. So she takes it to the vet, and then the vet said, well, I can either sew the dog up or I can put it down. And he said, but all the puppies are fine. And so they decided to sew her up, and within a week, this dog learned how to walk. She'd take a couple steps with her front legs and then flip her rear end over and just kind of scoot along like that. So not long after that, she gave birth to, I think it was like 12 healthy puppies. And as the puppies grew and it was time for them to begin to walk, they all walked just like her. And I love that illustration because was there anything wrong with those puppies' back legs?
No.
No. But many of them didn't work. And I take this story, that's where the story kind of ends. But I take this story further and I'm like, how many of those puppies stayed dragging their back end? And how many of them realized at some point or another, wait, these things work.
Right.
Right? And so the way that I address that in the book is I give really 2 models of thinking. And it's the victim mindset, or the victim model of thinking, or the victor model of thinking. So a lot of us come and think like we're broken, we're messed up. I know that was a lot of my story. There's something wrong with me. You know, I'm not working correctly. My body doesn't work correctly. I remember saying all the time, my body's doing this to me, right? So I know that the word victim is not a popular word. And I had even heard that at times, like some people had said, oh, you're playing the victim, or in different ways. And that's kind of like the whole it's in your mind thing. That didn't sit so well with me. But I think now I have such a different view of it because we learn everything. We have to learn everything. And just like those puppies, they learned from their environment.
Right.
And I have to understand, I learned how to process the world and how to look at the world from my environment.
Right.
But everybody does that. I really felt like I had been victimized when I was growing up. I felt like, oh, well, come on, I have the story. My parents did drugs, they divorced, there was abandonment, there was neglect, there was physical abuse, there was sexual abuse. I'm like, come on, I'm the poster child.
You had good reason to be sick.
I felt like, or angry. I started out pretty angry and abusive in a lot of ways myself in my after college years, fighting and like a lot of weird stuff, you know. But I felt like I had been a victim. And I remember kind of feeling really like entitled to a lot of the things that I felt or did based on my upbringing. And the problem became that even though I wasn't living at home anymore, I technically left home at 11, you know, ended up coming back with my mom years later, but still, I really felt like I was so strong and so supported or so supportive of myself, and I could really power through. But then I no longer lived with my family. I no longer lived in the same city, and yet I kept finding the same things over and over again. I was still alone, rejected, neglected, abandoned. I found it everywhere I went. People I would date, friends I would choose, jobs I would take. I'm like, this is it all over again. My childhood is repeating itself all over again. Poor me. And then again, it fed right back into there's something wrong with me. Oh, my life, woe is me, poor me. You know, and I felt really, really entitled to that. And, you know, the whole thing it was talking about being deceived, being cheated. I was like, yes, I have been. And this is all happening to me. So I had to really realize the difference between being a victim of a perpetration against me or what a victim mindset was. And come to find out, I actually had much stronger victim mindset. Now, we all know bad things happen, right? There is actual perpetrations against people. People are legitimately victims of things. But being victimized is very different than choosing to remain victimized.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to see the difference in. Yeah, I actually worked with a woman with rape who she said, I've had 20-some years of therapy over this. But why she ended up coming to me was she was married in a supporting, loving relationship, and it just so happened somehow her husband grabbed her wrist in just a way, like this, and it was, I can't remember what, he was trying to help her with something or protect her from something and really forcefully grabbed her wrist. She flipped.
Wow.
She was right back from, this was a memory that triggered that subconscious mind. Remember, it doesn't say like, but this is your husband. It doesn't reason and logic like that. It goes right back to that thing. It's flipping through that file folder and it goes, this was horrible. And the body goes into complete response as if it's happening now. And so 20-some years of therapy, and she goes into a little puddle of a mess because of something that like this. We have to clean up all of that stuff. All of that stuff is subconsciously stored. And I want to say, this idea of victimized mentality or victimized thinking, this isn't something that it's like, oh, shame on you for feeling victimized.
No, I think it's programmed in us.
It has to be.
Yeah.
It's from our childhood.
Right.
Because again, we talked about children are the most vulnerable people or most vulnerable things. In fact, in most of the animal kingdom, children pop out and they can run or swim or do something rather quickly. We are completely useless for years. Completely dependent and useless. So it's a good thing we're cute. God had to make them cute because otherwise, what do they do? Babies don't do anything. But we have to keep them alive. Children's thinking is completely self-focused, completely survival-driven.
Right.
They are victimized if anything happens to them because they have no voice yet. They have no real ideas. They have no real power of abstract thought,
Right.
where they can have a sense of self even. So we know most of us have kids enough to know now they've found their self and we're dealing with that.
Oh, yes.
But that is where it comes from. And it's so interesting in 1 Corinthians 13, where Paul's talking about, he says, when I was a child, I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. So, and then he said, and then I had to leave my childhood ways behind. That is our thinking. That is that victimized thinking, that they're doing it to me. And that is what I want to be really clear on, what it is to be a victimized thinker. Is the power is always outside of you.
Yes, that's a great note. Yes.
So if you are giving power to anything outside of you, then you're victimizing yourself because you're choosing to give your power to those things. So for instance, someone who says, this food is making me fat. You just gave an immense amount of power to that food, which it doesn't, at least my food doesn't often try to just crawl into my face without me, I'm usually putting it there for the most part. So it isn't the food making me fat if that's why, if I'm getting fat or whatever. Well, my parents abandoned me, so I have trust issues. I can't trust others. I have trust issues. They did this to me. I act this way because of this, right? Nobody understands my situation. Isn't that a very childhood? Nobody's mom makes them eat broccoli. Nobody. Everybody has a cell phone.
And that comes with healing that statement. And I've had to overcome that lie for many years of, yes, but you're not as sick as me. Like, you don't know how I feel.
Yes.
And that is a very victim mentality. Not that we don't do it on purpose.
No.
Right.
But we do it out of fear. We do it out of fear. because we're afraid to believe in something greater than how we feel.
Yeah. Well, I'm angry because I come from an angry family. You know, I'm an addict because it's in my genes. I come from a family of addicts. These are all disempowered statements. These are victimized statements. But we're taught to continue this model beyond childhood. This is what society and culture says. They say there are perks that come with this victimized mentality. People give you attention. They feel sorry for you. You know, like in some ways, that's people's entire identity. And for those people, what we're doing, let's say sick people, like we've all experienced, but, you know, we give the responsibility for our health and wellness into the hands of doctors who see hundreds of other patients a day, know nothing about us. And we say, you heal me. It's your fault if I don't get better. And it's also your responsibility to get me better. That's us, though. You don't have that power unless I give it to you. That doctor does not possess that power unless I've given it over. Right? So the perks of this, again, like I said, it's avoiding personal responsibility. It is not fun taking personal responsibility. Also, it gives us the power to feel like righteously persecuted and, you know, but this is why I can't do these things and you don't know how hard it is for me. And we stand up on this pedestal that is built off of all of our illnesses. But we give it the power. The power is taken away from us. That is where we've stepped outside of the being a victim of a perpetration, and now we're the ones perpetrating against us. We're continuing to do it to ourselves and thinking it gives us power. Then we have to succumb to the validity or what people give us, the value that we find for ourselves has to come for others because we're giving them our power. I've heard people, and it makes sense, like, I don't want to open that can of worms. I don't want to go back there. We hear the past is in the past. Leave it. The problem is it's not. Because if it's in here, we're doing it over and over and over again. It's the only thing. We can only give people what we hold from within. I can desperately want to give you something else, but I'm going to give you what I have. So you can want from me, I always use this example, you can want from me, be so hungry for it and in desperate need of vitamin C and want an orange from me. And I love you and I want to give you an orange. If I have an apple, I can all day long tell you it's an orange and hope that it's an orange, but frankly, it's an apple and it always will be. Unless I go get an orange and then I can give you an orange if I'm giving you something, right? But otherwise, I can only give you what I have within. If I want something different to give, I've got to change my resources on what I have, what I hold. So that's where we get to move from the childish thinking, and I'm not using that in a derogatory sense, but in a real, our immature thinking, move into our prefrontal cortex and say, I have a choice in how I feel, how I react, what I think about, and I can be the master of my mind. But to do that, we do have to go in. We have to see what's there. And we have to address it. Now, I get why people were afraid to do this for a long time. Because then you're going to end up in 38 years of therapy. And still, just as long as no one grabs your wrist,
run around the mountain.
Right? Then, no, but this is something that it's quick, it's easy, and there's proof that it works. Now, if you cannot feel bad about something, if you cannot hate that person who perpetrated against you, you can't. You know you've moved on from that. You know you've healed from that. That is the victor model. That's the conqueror model. Conquer doesn't mean nothing bad ever happens, that you're in la la land. Conqueror means you've overcome things, but you're victorious in them. They're no longer there, alive, still beating on you, still hacking away at you. No, they're gone, done. You've won. You're the victor. You're the clear winner. You're not engaged in battle with that person any longer. That's the victor mentality. If I had this with my stepfather, who was my primary physical abuser growing up, and I thought, like, no, I'm over it. I hate him, but I'm over it. Then I became a Christian I wasn't supposed to hate. So I was like, all right, yeah, I forgive him. Well, I never had to see him, never had to think about him, never had anything like that. I would relate to other abuse victims, me too, and talk about these things. You know, I didn't talk about it much, I have to say, but I did still relate it. And I hadn't seen my stepfather in goodness knows how many years. Then there came a point where he died. And I only later found out about that. How can he still be doing this to me?
Wow.
Mm-hmm. How? How am I still an abused child? I'm not. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. I'm not saying that. But I've changed those resources in my mind. I don't find abuse anymore. In fact, I actually have true, real love for him. I find I get a little bit of emotion. So I always have to tell myself that because I have to I'm feeling emotional right now.
Yes.
Because I didn't used to. I have emotion that comes from love and forgiveness and compassion for what this man came up with, what influenced him to be able to hurt children.
Yeah.
So different, so far beyond what I thought was forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. And you have a quick, you don't have to share the story, but just a little testimony with that. You had severe back pain, right?
Yeah.
And when you changed the memory of the abuse or certain memories, the back pain went away.
Okay, this is so interesting. Remember we talked about the subconscious mind being metaphoric. And it will represent things in our body based on certain things that have happened to us. So I had chronic lower back pain for 15 years. You know, that whole thing you bend over, you get stuck, you know. And one time I remember that happened and I ended up in the hospital on the doctor said, I've given you enough painkillers to kill a rhino. I can't give you anything else. I'm like, you know, and I was still, they could barely move me or I would scream. And I'm not a big screamer, you know. So this back pain, terrible. So I'm doing this work and I'm asked to go back to any abuse because our body represents, don't have time to get into it now, but I can now tell you if something's wrong with your body, what probably that relates to. So at the time, have you ever experienced any abuse? Yeah. Okay. Well, who with? My stepfather. And I'm very nonchalant about it. Like, I've dealt with all this. Go ahead, try to make me, And then he goes, do you have a memory of that? Yeah, I got a picture of it, And he's like, okay, getting me there. And do you feel anything? No, I don't feel a thing. That's what I said. No, I don't feel anything about it. It's done. It's over. Do you have a picture? Yeah. Where is he kicking you? In my back. I didn't remember that. I didn't remember. He had held me up and kicked me in the back. That was kind of a common thing, and he was a construction worker, so he'd had these big boots,
Heather.
So he was kicking me in the back. Until that moment, my subconscious mind had not given me that part of the memory.
Wow.
When it was a safe place to come up, that came up. And then with the work we do, it was changed and taken care of quickly. I instantly started crying because I was like, ugh. Now me, I had no issues with my abuse anymore, all done, all over with. I was just sobbing. And then, but quickly I came back to, then, and we'll get into how this all happens, probably not even within these episodes, but with changing the way that my memory was held in my mind, we were out eating ice cream. It just went to that. I'm sure that happened. And now I was eating ice cream with him and so much different forgiveness, so many different wonderful things. And that whole thing about memory, and that could be a whole different thing, but we do think memory is real. Often we see it or we feel it or we smell it or we remember it, right? I remember this happened. Right. It is real. But memory, the research on memory shows that it is actually not real and permanent the way we're now seeing it. So I was seeing something that had happened to me, at this point, maybe 20 years prior, maybe more than that. And to me, I'm thinking this is what really happened to me. But memory, Elizabeth Loftus is an amazing woman who's done incredible research on memory. So look her up. She's got such great stuff about how every time you revisit a memory, you change it. Yeah. Now, see, the subconscious mind, remember, is always pulling this stuff up. It's revisiting these file folders. We don't even know it's happening. But every time we visit that file folder, we change details there. We're looking back. This happened. Well, I'm not saying the abuse didn't happen, but what it felt like, what was happening, what I projected onto him about him hating me. He didn't hate me. I think he probably hated himself.
I was going to say he was hurting. He was a hurting man.
I think he actually loved me. I really do. but I think he was in pain. And I know personally for him,
Yep.
he grew up in a very abusive household.
Yeah.
And he was my stepfather. He never even had children of his own. So much stuff like that is just amazing. That moves us into that victor mindset where now I choose how I think about this.
Yes.
I choose how I feel about him. I choose how I feel about me at that age. My back doesn't have to hold that anymore going, there's unresolved stuff here.
Right.
My back didn't have to keep telling me you've got something to deal with that you keep not dealing with. It came up, I dealt with it, I changed it, and my back pain went away.
Gives me chills. It
Yeah.
gives me chills.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's amazing.
And now I am the victor over my childhood.
Amen.